Welcome to the Humourology Podcast with me, Paul Boross, and my glittering lineup of guests from the worlds of business, politics, sport and entertainment, who are here to share their wisdom and their use of humour with you. Humourology is the study of how humour can dramatically improve every aspect of your business and your life. Humourology puts the fun into business fundamentals, increases the value of your laughing stock, and puts a punchline back into your bottom line. Please remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. My guest on this edition of the Humourology Podcast is known around the world for his experimental psychology in the subjects of humour, deception, and success. In addition to his research into the mind, he is the massively successful author of books like The Luck Factor, 59 Seconds, Night School, and Quirkology. He is also the host of Richard Wiseman's On the Mind podcast, co-hosted with Marnie Chesterton. When he's not doing research or writing books, you can find him at the University of Hertfordshire, where he holds the title of the only Professor of the Public Understanding of Psychology in the UK. Not only is he a master of the mind, but he is a member of the Magic Circle's Inner Circle and serves as an advisor for some of the nation's most memorable magicians. Professor Richard Wiseman, welcome to the Humourology Podcast.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure, because I am genuinely a fan, and I can tell our many listeners that I actually have your books and admire them, and they're very, very well.
That's very kind. Thank you, and thank you for being. There's only two people that have actually bought copies over the years. There's yourself and somebody else in Hull. So thank you for that.
Well, we're both very pleased because we're in touch and we discuss them all the time. I believe you were brought up in Luton. What kind of family were you brought up in? And crucially, was humour valued?
Oh, it was, absolutely. Yeah, so I was brought up in Luton, which is just north of London. And all my early childhood memories is of us laughing. And in fact, my parents are very funny. My parents are still alive. And for the podcast recently, we were doing an episode on relationships. So I said to my dad, I said, how come you stuck together with mum for 60-something years? And off the top of his head, he said, I haven't been home since 1956. So, which was great. And I said to my mum, why have you stuck with dad? And she said all the other options have died off.
Well, by the way, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it?
Well, that's very kind. But yeah, so yes, they're very funny people. And as I say, my earliest childhood memories are as of laughing, basically.
Well, was that humour that you saw on television as well? Or was that important to the whole dynamic of the house?
I think it was, and yes, we used to watch a lot of situation comedies. So we'd watch Dad's Army was a big one, very, very funny. Morecambe and Wise, and I was thinking the other day, they age very, very well. You can still watch them, and they're unlike many of their other people from that time, where it's really gone out of date or it's offensive or whatever. Morecambe and Wise absolutely haven't, and very, very funny. So yeah, I grew up on all that stuff, and just think that humour. Yeah, it's very hard to imagine my life without humour. I just think. The sound of people laughing is such an important sound. I mean, we talk about nature sounds or birds or other music or whatever, but you know what? There's something very fundamental about the human laugh. And Victor Borge said it, a laugh was the sort of shortest distance between two people. And that's a lovely, lovely quote. And I think it sort of sums up how I feel about humour.
One of my favourite quotes ever, actually, Victor Borge. And what a hilarious man as well. You don't see him, you never see clips anymore unless you go on YouTube, which I advise people to do. But he was an amazing comedian. And for a Danish comedian, huge in America as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and very funny. And he did that bit where he'd sort of go up the piano, and then his hand would go off the end of the piano, and he'd do it again, go off the end of the piano, and then he'd take the music and just rip a strip off the edge, and that meant he could play normally. So all of these kind of very silly gags. But again, that works for any age group. It works for, it's timeless, it's silly, but it's funny. And that's the stuff that I like in terms of humor.
Yeah, would the Jesuits say, "Give me a child of 7 and I will give you the man"? Was the young Richard Wiseman already doing gags and funny?
I've always been funny. Ask anyone. I've always been funny. When I was born, I did 3 gags immediately. I don't know. I think Les Dawson.
The umbilical cord thing.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. No, I was thinking of the Les Dawson gag. When I was born, I was so ugly that the midwife slapped my mother. I even my early memories at school was being funny. I enjoyed being funny. It's something I've always done. I've got early sort of cine film of me messing around and doing magic and so on. And humor is so important to magic. I mean, you can do magic in a very po-faced way, but you're setting yourself up for a tricky night. So humor is so important, and often you get away with all sorts of things in magic because you're being funny. And likable, which I think will probably come up quite a lot in this interview, that humor and likability to me are bedfellows. And so it's so important because, you can have humor without likability and you're not really left with very much. So for me, it's bringing those two things together.
Well, we have a good mutual friend in the magician Paul Zenon, and when he was on the show, he said he was a fairly shy kid, but enjoyed showing off on stage. Would that apply to you as well? Because there's that old saying that performance being the shy person's revenge on the world.
I don't know, it's revenge. I think my thoughts about performing have definitely changed. I mean, I grew up with Paul Daniels being the sort of magician on television and so on. And Paul, wonderful magician that he was, of course, it was quite barbed humor. It's picking on members of the audience and so on. But that's how my generation grew up. And we thought that's what magic should be. And now I think magic is changing. I think it's changing to something where people perhaps aren't quite so embarrassed or reluctant to come up on stage because it's really about celebrating the sort of entirety of the audience, not picking on people. In terms of shyness, I'm people. So if you're a performer, and I don't perform that much magic now, but I speak a lot. I do a lot of corporate speaking and public talks. I think people assume what they're seeing in front of them on stage is the same as the offstage person. Now, you don't get that assumption with actors because they're clearly playing a role. If you go and see somebody, Macbeth, you don't expect they're going to be the same person off stage. But there's something about comedians and magicians and speakers where there is this sort of authenticity. So they think, well, this is going to be somebody who's very, very confident and so on. Actually, I'm quite shy. And so often when I'm out with my partner, Caroline, and there's, I don't know, maybe we're checking into a hotel, I'll say, can you go and do it? Because that one-to-one thing is a difficult thing for me. But then the sort of weird clash comes when people see you on stage being very confident and think you're going to be like that off stage. I'm actually reasonably shy, not with friends, but with strangers, definitely.
So, I mean, a lot of people who listen to this podcast are in business and they're, terrified of public speaking. What do you think? Because you've just admitted that, like everyone, I always say that there's 2 types of people in the world, those who get nervous and liars. It's what's the best way you've found to combat that fear?
Fear of nervousness speaking?
Nervousness speaking, yeah. Or shyness, basically. I mean, what you described as shyness, because there must be a leap to actually stand up in front of people, which I'm always intrigued by the psychology of that.
So interesting you asked that. So in my head, they're different things. So shyness-wise, I don't have a problem. And so if it's 3 people I don't know and I've got to go and talk to them about whatever it is, checking in at a hotel, I will be reluctant. Give me 300 people, give me 3,000 people. I won't be bothered at all. I'm not bothered. And I think the reason for that, and I'm nervous, but I'll talk about nervousness in a minute. I'm not bothered because when I go on that stage, I've got a 45-minute talk that I've given now for 23 years. I know that talk inside out, upside down. I know what can go wrong. I've got every plan if it does go wrong. I know how to talk to an audience, how to listen to an audience, the beats of the audience, and all those things. And I think it's that means I'm not worried about doing it. Now, a few moments before, 5 minutes before, I'll be nervous, and thank goodness I am, because you don't want to walk out sort of looking like you don't care. You've got to walk out. When I give talks about how to give talks, I talk about the illusion of spontaneity. I've done that opening 25 years, but for them, it has to be the first time. Otherwise, I'm dead in the water. They're just listening to somebody who's, parroting off a script. So I've never had a script. I exist only in my head. I never read. I never have a lectern. I rarely look at the audience. I do a very weird thing. I break one of the rules. I look down mostly because I'm focusing on what I need to say as if it's the first time I've said it. And I think there's an authenticity there. And I'm listening. I'm listening to the audience for what I call beats, so that, it's me talking to them. They listen and they respond. And often they respond. That's what's so good about humor. You can tell whether they're listening or not because you get a laugh. But I'm listening sometimes to silence, because interested silence sounds different to bored silence. Bored silence is dead, with the occasional shifting in the seat and coughing at the back. where intense listening silence is just this lovely beam of energy from the audience that you can absolutely feel. So yes, I'm nervous. But it's not the same, I think, that it's not the same unease of going across the room to complain about your meal, which would be my living hell, to 2 or 3 people the other side of the room.
So it is something that switches in the mind, doesn't it? That this is. I mean, I speak, and obviously my background is, Comedy Store and those things. Mm-hmm. I always think that you said listening, which I think is one of those words that people don't think enough when you want to be connected, is you really are hypersensitive to everything that's going on, and that listening factor of, like, I was intrigued when you said you could, the beam of light that comes from when people are interested, because of course all our senses are there and feeling that, aren't they? So I'm just intrigued. I'd like to take it a stage further. And if you were giving somebody advice, and you said you speak about this anyway, what would that bit of advice be? Would it be about listening, or would it be, because I'll tell you mine, because just, our listeners will think. I say that when you and I are having a conversation, we are just listening to each other and reacting. You said, I don't have a script. I never have a script either, because I say, when you go to a coffee shop with somebody, you don't go there and go, I've got a list of things I'm going to ask you. Did you see the game on Saturday? What really good performers do is you just connect and then start speaking.
I think that's right. But you have probably said those similar words and those similar ideas many times before. And so, funnily enough, several things are flooding into my head here. One thing I will say, I gave a talk to about 3,000 people a couple of years ago, and I was with Caroline, my partner. We came off, we went to the coffee shop, and the coffee was late. We ordered it, they weren't bringing it to the table. I couldn't bring myself to go up and say, can you, have you forgotten about us? I had to send her after speaking to 3,000 people.
Wow.
And that to me is the difference. So that's one thing. When I first started out speaking, and I should say to people, I'm sort of a scientist, I'm very rational and all of those sorts of things. One of the first gigs was with a guy who was then a very experienced speaker. And before the talk in the wings, I could see him quietly shut his eyes. And I said afterwards, what were you doing? And he said, I was sending my spirit into the earth to connect with the spirit of everyone here. And I thought that was the weirdest, wooiest, new ageiest thing. And now I do it. I stand there and I just listen to the energy of the room. Because if the energy is down, I don't want to come out and go, ta-da! And I'm in the wrong energy. They're down here and I'm up here. And equally, if they're up here, I don't want to come out and all be dead. So So you listen to the energy and you feel it. And it's intuition, but it's intuition built on 25 years of doing it. It's knowledge in that sense.
Well, in one sense, is it also not mirroring and matching what
Yes.
they're giving you?
Yes, it's very, very important. I think that you those opening bits. I mean, they've made up their mind almost within in the first 30 seconds whether they're going to like you or not. Yeah. And I just think if you bound out and you've got the energy wrong, or you've got, maybe it's a serious group. Talking of which, I was going to tell you about this. About 2 years ago, I did a talk. Boy, it was flat. To me, it was like, this is a quiet place to rehearse. I knew that none of the things that were supposed to be getting laughs were getting laughs. And if that had been my first talk, I would never have gone back to it. Yeah. But thank goodness I've done it so many times. You stick your head down and you get through it. So I come off and I think, God, what should I say to the organizers? Should I say, God, sorry about that, but we all have rough days, or should I blame it on the audience or whatever? And I decided to say nothing, to just pack up my bags and leave. Now, I get a phone call from them the next day. Richard, that was the most amazing talk. Oh, we'd love it. And then they booked me for 3 other talks. And of course, I'd seen all the talks where I'd stormed it, and they hadn't seen that. And so for them, that was a great talk. For me, it was probably one of the worst ones I've ever given. And it was a real lesson in not walking off stage and saying to people, well, that was a rough old one, wasn't it? And then they go, yeah, it was. And then you'll never get booked again. So it was a very strange thing. Anyway, to get back to your question, very long rambling answer. What do I say to people? The first thing I say to people is you don't have to do this. There are certain things I'm not very good at. And quite frankly, I can try as much as I want, but there'll be people in the room that are naturally better than me. And that's the way it should be. You don't have to do it. Second, if you are going to do it, try and be authentic, try and be yourself, and put as much of yourself into the talk as possible. And I've seen so many speakers that speak in the abstract, and the moment they ground it in their experience, it becomes interesting. There was a talk, an AGM, I saw probably a decade ago now, and the guy did it at every single AGM. He had to give all this boring AGM information, which I didn't really understand about the finances of the company. But in between each bit, he spoke about his last holiday and showed holiday slides. And it was a joy, because you're sitting there looking at these dull graphs, and then he'd say, and then we went to Belgium, and we went to this coffee shop, and all this thing. So as much of you in there as possible. And my third tip, which is the one I give out most often, is if you say to somebody, how would you become a great potter? How would you be good at making pots? Everyone gives you the same answer. You make a lot of pots. Yeah. You don't get good by reading books on it or by going to the museum. That will help you, but you get good by making pots. And it's the same with speaking. And it's the same with magic. It's probably the same with comedy. You get good by doing it again and again and again and again. The luck talk, I've been doing something like 25 years. It's still not perfect, but it's pretty good. And so that's my answer. Get out there and do it again and again and again and again.
Well, it's a brilliant answer. And, sometimes the bleeding obvious is the thing that people miss, which is, what you've talked about in magic as well. I'm fascinated by your 10-year study on luck, which you just mentioned. I really enjoyed your book, The Luck Factor, by the way, and as it chimes with so many of my personal beliefs. Were there some of the discoveries you made about luck during the research that you'd like to share with us? That because I could talk for hours about attitude and things like that, but
yeah, I guess so. I mean, from a personal perspective, given what I just said about speaking. For me, the greatest learning was spending, and so we should say to people that the Luck Factor was based on about 1,000 interviews with exceptionally lucky and unlucky people. Came about because I'd actually pitched a book on the psychology of the paranormal from quite a skeptical, rational perspective. Nobody wanted to touch it. Every publisher said no. And I had a chance meeting back with my agent after they'd all said no. He said, what else are you working on? I said, I'm doing this thing on luck. And that sounds interesting. What's that? Can you make people luckier? And I said, I think so, by doing these sorts of behavioral things. And that was the one we pitched. And that was very, very early on in the whole positive psychology movement. So I didn't sort of have any kind of road forward. I had to sort of create the road myself. So that project involves spending a lot of time with lucky and unlucky people. And the biggest thing I would say is how the difference in the energy, I'm going to come back to this word again, it sounds very new age, but you walked into a room with lucky people and you just felt a sense of gratitude. You were happy to be alive. They bounced in. There was a big smile. It was reflected in your own energy. You started to talk about things you didn't expect to talk about. It was lovely. An unlucky person would come in, and within 2 minutes, you're thinking, yeah, I've got a bit of a bad back myself as well, actually. And that was the big take home, the degree to which our, whatever you want to call it, energy, personality, charisma, affect other people. And of course, you don't realize it if that's your entire world, because you're never seeing any other world. Years ago, a good friend of mine was a New York model, a very, very beautiful woman. And I spent a day with her in New York. Her world's completely different to my world. People open doors for her. They sit at the front of restaurants. You get amazing service. There's people talking to her all the time. And I said, that's not most people's world. And she got no idea, because that was her world. No. So we create our own worlds in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I always say, if you want anyone to go into any state, you have to go into that state first. So that I was fascinated by the luck thing. My father died about 7 years ago. And my father at 17 was thrown into the Second World War as a Hungarian. So he was stationed outside Dresden. And then he sat there and watched what, it flattened, he'd been in and out of there. Thing. Then they went up and joined with the Allies and went in with in 45 to Berlin, hid for a cellar in 3 days, bombs everywhere, end of the war. Then they were all herded into camps while they found out who was friend or foe. I'm giving a very truncated, eventually months later comes back to Hungary, studies again, gets married, has 2 kids. The Hungarian Revolution happens in 56, but my father spent his whole life going, I'm lucky. And his idea of luck, and he told me, is when people were put up against a wall and shot, he was one of the ones who wasn't shot.
Yes.
And so I think that whole thing, and what I loved about your stuff and the luck factor and the luck diary and chance opportunities and all those, is that our perceptions and attitudes play such a huge, significant role in determining how we perceive ourselves to be lucky or unlucky.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of our studies were giving the same scenario to lucky and unlucky people. And our famous one was, you go into a bank and in bursts a robber and they've got a gun, they fire a shot, it hits you in the arm. Are you lucky or unlucky? And the lucky people go, oh, that's amazing. It could have been my head, could have been my heart. The unlucky people go, well, it could have missed me completely. It's just another unlucky day. So exactly. I mean, and of course, again, that was a major shift for us, because people had looked at luck previously in a kind of statistical way. You go to the casino, do you win, do you lose, and so on. And the little twist there was just to go, let's look at how people perceive luck and compare the lucky and unlucky people. And that unlocked that entire world. And that's what I love. And they're very similar to jokes. Ideas, lateral ideas, which suddenly, once you've thought it, it's obvious, and it unlocks this massively different way of seeing the world. And humor can do it, and magic can do it as well. And I always think that, when I'm involved in projects, I always think, there is another solution. We just haven't found it yet. It's the same as magic. It's exact same. There is something out there. We just haven't found it. We just need to keep going. Where a lot of people give up early on because they can't figure out an answer. And I think my eternal optimism comes from, I think, magic and humor and seeing these projects turn overnight because one person says, you know what? And then suddenly you've got this different project in front of you.
Well, you see, optimism, I think, is one of those things that successful people have. And you talked about positive psychology earlier on, and that focuses on what makes life worth living, and I think you describe it as moving from good to great. How does humour fit into this perspective, particularly in enhancing well-being?
Well, humour is a multi-edged sword, as you'll know. And so some humour, I don't think does fit in. I think some humour is quite bullying, it's quite negative, it's alienating, and all of those sorts of things. And often is coming from quite a dark place. I don't think that does fit in. I think there's another type of humour, which is about bonding people together, which is about helping the group, which is about laughing at something silly rather than other people. And most of the lucky people I met were certainly cheerful, and some of them were funny people. But again, those two things are quite separate. Funniness, the ability to really make other people laugh and be creative and so on, I think is one skill set. Cheerfulness, which is making other people just generally feel good and being so happy and so on, is a different thing. So all this stuff is quite fine-grained, I think, psychologically. But humour for me is you don't see the two fish in a tank and one turns to the other and says, do you know how to drive this? You don't realize they're in an army tank until that final moment. And that, to me, symbolizes sort of lateral thinking and the fact that there is another solution out there. We just haven't found it yet. And I've been in so many situations where people have wanted to rush in to a second best solution. And I go, no, it's out there. The punchline is out there. We just haven't found it yet. And once we've got it, we'll know, and we need to be agile enough to suddenly all switch around. And I think if I've got any kind of skill at all, that's one of my big skills. It makes me very annoying to work with because my team, who are lovely, know that everything may change at 1 minute to midnight if somebody comes up with a better idea.
Well, but isn't that being in the moment as well? Which I think, the two things of the things we discussed, well, three of the things: attitude, listening, being in the moment, are what makes humour. In one sense, because you're reacting as well. Because I think a lot of you speak a lot at conferences, as do I, and that whole thing about if you are properly listening, you will react to what has gone on in the room. If the compere, the MC trips as it goes off, you have to say something. You have to address that.
Yes, I think, and that's, in that sense, it's knowing the distractions to ignore and the ones to go after, because there are some you do want to just let other people get on with it. But yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, in terms of ideas, we did a year-long search of the world's funniest joke called Laugh Lab many, many years ago. And that idea came about because the British Association of Advancement of Science, they were at the time, wanted to come up with a project that would last a year, engage everyone in the country, kids could join in and so on. They invited me in to pitch for ideas, and we had loads of them, but nothing was right. Nothing was right, nothing. And we could have progressed with any of these ideas within the team. And I said, we just haven't heard the punchline yet. And the weird thing was that I didn't have it on the day of the meeting. I walked into that room with nothing. And my only pitch was, we're going to find the world's funniest joke. And they went, sold. That's what we want. And I had to walk out and figure out a way of making it happen. But I found the punchline in the room. And I've often done that sometimes if you just trust your instinct and hold off, you'll find it under fire. And when you give a talk, your best line sometimes comes to you right at that moment. And you think, how did my brain figure that one out? And that stays in the talk for 20 years.
Oh, I've done it many, many times. But if you're really present, as they would say, that's when you're. I think it's about playing as well. If you've got an attitude of play and you are playful, that's where real humor comes from. And if you allow yourself to be in that state, I think then A, other people will go into that state, but B, that you'll be able to play. I mean, we play constantly with words and with ideas. And I think that's really the thing. You talked about, all the studies you've done, you tracked 26,000 people to understand what makes them happy at one stage as well. Are there any common factors or practices that constantly lead to happiness amongst individuals?
Well, to some extent, it is trait. It is, we have a set point of happiness, and some people's are higher than others. In terms of what's called state, which is sort of how you then alter that a little bit, there's all sorts of things you can do. One of them is the gratitude diary, this idea of what have you got a sense of gratitude for, that we all forget the good things in our lives. Another is just hanging around with happy people. Another is finding the funny, as it were. I happen to have a very, very, very good memory for jokes. And it's not that I tell those jokes, but frequently I see something in life and it just reminds me of that joke and it makes me laugh. And so I don't tell the joke, it's just something internally. And that, again, for me, actually is one of the sort of joys of being alive.
Oh, so, well, talking of jokes, which is fascinating. I'm not sure if you know this, but on page 13 of my latest book, you appear quoted because of your theory on why people love Christmas cracker jokes.
Yes.
And
my greatest theoretical contribution to psychology.
Well, I think it really is, because honestly, it resonated with me so much that I put it really early in my book.
Well, yeah, I mean, one talks about Freud and his discovery of the unconscious being an important moment in the turning point of psychology. But compared to my discovery of the idea of Christmas cracker jokes, I mean, the man doesn't stand a chance. Nothing. And he spent his whole life coming up with that. I did that theory in just a few moments. I know all the fuss was about. The idea, I can't remember where that I think the context was writing an article for a newspaper about psychology at Christmas. But yeah, Christmas cracker jokes are terrible. And my thought was that if you give somebody some good material and they screw it up, it really is on them. And you go, oh my goodness, you can't tell a joke. And telling a joke's really difficult. You have to have rhythm. You've got to remember the words. You've got to finish on a certain word. It's so easy to mess it up and so on. But if you give somebody some terrible material that makes us all groan, well, you can blame it on the material. And it becomes this bonding thing that we're all going to tell terrible jokes, which is actually much better than all telling really good jokes and messing half of them up. So, yeah, that was my theory, was that there was more to Christmas crackers than met the eye.
Well, it's funny. I'm a coach at a running club, Wimbledon Windmilers. And on Boxing Day, we always have a Boxing Day run. And everybody brings the worst jokes that they had at the Christmas table. Yeah. And, some of them get a laugh just for sympathy sometimes, I think. But yes. It really bonds people. And I think that the awfulness and the fact that you're in this together, it's kind of like trench warfare.
Christmas in my family is very much like trench warfare. We did years ago when my brother and I were, I guess I was probably at 10 or something like that. We decided to play a practical joke on my family, which is we got hold of the Christmas crackers and we undid them quietly and removed everything inside every Christmas cracker and then sealed them back up. So Christmas Day came and we're all sitting around the table with some extended family. We all pull the crackers and there's nothing inside any of them. My mum says to my dad, where did you get these crackers? He said, well, I got them down the market. And she goes, these are the worst crackers, you idiot. You've ruined our Christmas by getting all these cheap crackers. And I have never laughed so much in my life of watching my dad go, well, I paid quite a lot of money for these crackers. And then we bought out all the innards and distributed them amongst the family. Yes. Now, of course, Victorian crackers were very different. Victorian crackers were about bringing the group together. So often you'd all get a little bell, and each bell was tuned to a different note. And somebody would be the the conductor, and they'd conduct the people around the table to create a very simple tune. And so it's about bringing people together rather than what gift did you get and is it better than mine?
Well, music and humour. I obviously, I used to work in music and comedy. So those two things bonded together are a thing. And all musicians want to be comedians and all comedians want to be musicians.
Nobody's ever happy.
No, nobody's ever happy. No.
I've done the bell thing. You can still buy those sorts of bells, and I've done it many times with groups. They're little coloured, different coloured bells, and you have a sort of chart, and you point to green, blue, and you do sort of jingle bells or whatever. And it's a great activity because there's always somebody that messes up, and it's funny, and you start again. But you feel the group kind of bonding, and that's what I love about it. Is that everyone now we're all together on this, and that's why I think actually I've been attracted to the sort of psychology that I've been attracted to, which is, a lot of psychology is about, very serious topics and quite dark topics. And my stuff tends to be quite light and hopefully positive.
Well, I think it is positive. And I think, all your books testify that you are actually not looking for what went wrong. You're looking for how can we make things right?
Yeah. And how can you make things even better for people? I mean, it's a joy. It's unbelievably against the odds that any of us are on this earth. What a magnificent place that we live in, and we should be celebrating that. And instead, we're quite good at killing one another and being rather downbeat about everything. So yeah, hopefully it brings a little bit of celebration into things.
So is humour a superpower?
I think it's useful. For me.
But is it something that's only given to the few, or we get into the old psychological argument of can it be taught? And do you either you hear the rhythm or you don't hear the rhythm? So we go back to the music thing of the rhythmic thing.
I think it's much like that. I mean, I have no musical ability whatsoever. I mean, I couldn't hold a tune. It's awful. And so when I hear people playing the piano, it is like magic. I think, how could you do that? How? I can't understand how you could do that. The same with speaking different languages. I have absolutely zero ability when I meet people who speak 3 or 4 languages. It's unbelievable. But when it comes to humor, like you're saying, I can hear the rhythm. I know where the moment should fall. I know that what that word should be. And that feels quite intuitive. I'm sure you could teach me to play something very simple on the piano, but it's never going to be great, is my guess. And that's how I feel about a lot of humor stuff. I think you can teach people to be cheerful. I'm not saying I want to teach anyone to be funny, as in create funny material. I'm sure you could give people a script and get them to be a good comedian, because that's just about delivery, but not the creation, I think, of humor.
Okay, well, I'm going to, because I'm dealing with an eminent psychologist, I'm going to push back on that theory, just because, well, what I'm going to say is that if whatever you say to yourself becomes your reality. So if you are saying, I could never be a good musician, isn't that the self-fulfilling prophecy that stops it happening? Anyway, my mother, who will be listening to this, has spent her whole life going, I can't tell jokes. And then she starts from that premise and that attitude. So there you go. I'm lobbing that grenade back.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I think there are natural limits. I think some of it is brain-based. I'm never going to be a great basketball player. I'm whatever I am, 5'9". I can hope as much as I want, but I'm just never going to be up there in the top league with the tall people. So I think there are natural limits. It's about making the best of what you have. So I'm sure your mum could be taught to tell a joke a bit better. I don't think she's ever going to do 20 minutes at the Comedy Store. If she does, I'm in the front row.
She's only 92, Richard. She's got plenty of time.
Goodness. There is plenty of time. That would be great. That would be great. So that's my guess, is that we're trying to maximize everyone's potential. And that's why I suppose I was saying earlier on about the speaking, is some people are naturally good speakers and good presenters, and other people are not. And in some ways, pursuing the talents and abilities you have will lead you, I think, to flourish in those particular areas.
I have to say that I do agree, because I think that, I mean, obviously you and I have grown up around comedians and know a lot of them. And you hear funny, don't you? I remember being a kid, and that's why I asked you the question at the start. I remember, I know, the Morecambe and Wise, Andre Previn, funny enough, and Alan Boyd, who I interviewed on stage in Germany. was brought in and just directed that on a Saturday morning with live cameras. It's a fascinating story because Morecambe and Wise were terrified because they hadn't had enough time to rehearse with him. And then suddenly you see, if you watch that again, you suddenly see Eric Morecambe's eyes open and go, he gets it. He gets it. And there's a joy that you're playing with somebody who gets it. And I think there's no greater joy than, and this is why humorology exists, because it's about how do you get more joy into every aspect of your business and your life. Well, actually, it's about playing, isn't it?
I think it is. I mean, it's handy to be able to be competent at your job as well. We've all met the hilarious incompetence, and what a joy that is. So it's good. I mean, I quite like working with competent people, whether they're funny or not. That's an extra thing.
I'll give you that.
Yes, then life is a bit more fun. But I think playing is good. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to spend most of my career playing, actually, and doing the things that interest me. So as a kid, I was interested in magic. As I was about 8, I was interested in magic and comedy, actually. And then I got interested in psychology in my teens, and then managed to bring them together in certain ways. So I have spent most of my time playing. And what's good about that is that if you're intrinsically motivated like that, you'll spend longer doing it than anyone else. You'll probably end up better than most people, and certainly much better than you were originally, because you spent so much time doing it and it hasn't felt too much like work. And I know that because when I'm involved in a project, no matter how much money I'm being offered, if my heart's not in it, boy, every minute feels like an hour. Where, once it's reading about magic, which I'll do tonight, and I did last night as well, about some obscure theory of magic, I'm just a little 8-year-old kid again.
Well, that's, I mean, well, now we're getting into a huge, well, we'll have to do another show because we can talk for days about this stuff. But that's my theory on education, is that actually we all need the basics, but really what people need to follow is their passions, because then they'll do that really well. And you and I have been lucky enough to make a living out of something we're passionate about. And I think you're right that you will, what do they say, is to find something you love and you'll never work another day in your life.
I think that's right. And I think, yes, and find a way of making a living out of the thing you love, and you'll probably be happy. I mean, I should say that you and I probably grew up in the same sort of time when there were lots of opportunities around. I mean, I went to university and got a grant. If I couldn't have got that grant, I would never have gone to university. Absolutely. It's not like that now. So there are systemic factors that do make it tricky for people. We should always acknowledge that. But there's a lot of internal factors as well, which is what we're talking about here. Yeah.
Well, we're talking about people who followed their passions. We've got a question from outside, from somebody you might recognize. This is Mr. Paul Zenon, who asked to ask you a question live on the show.
Hello, Mr. B. Here's my question for Professor Wiseman, and it is, in the midst of all the depth of your discussions about the ins and outs of, the finer points of comedy, humour, and its role in the world in general. Why are bananas funny? This is something that's been bothering me for some time. Bananas are, I think, just intrinsically funny. And I'm not sure why that is, whether it's because they're curved, because curved equals wacky, zany in some ways, I suppose. Is it because, well, I mean, there's the obvious thing about them being a kind of sort of phallic symbol, but then you could say the same about sausages, and yet kids find both bananas and sausages just funny anyway. Is that because of the kind of their names, the kind of the alliteration and repetition, banana, no, or sausages, is that funny? Is it the colour of bananas, yellow? Is yellow somehow the funny colour? I don't know. It's up to you to answer that question, and I want answers, and I want them now.
Very good. Very good. I've known Paul many, many years, and he had a great show at the Fringe. This one just gone. which is about humor and comedy. It was about the sort of things that when you and I had Marvel and DC magazines and comics as a kid, there were these adverts in the back that would sort of promise you a 7-foot-high monster or a million, I don't know, sold plastic soldiers for 50 cents. And Paul's show was about what happened if you sent off your money and how disappointed you were when basically somebody was laughing, but it wasn't the kid getting the gift, is the bottom line. So it's a very good question from Mr. Zenon. And I think he's touched upon some of the answers in the question. So, of course, from a Freudian perspective, I'm a little bit of a Freudian, not a massive one. I did actually lay on Freud's couch, one of the few people to have laid on Freud's couch. When we did I think the first announcement, the world's funniest joke, we did it at the Freud Museum. And his couch is there. And I said, can I lay on it? And they said, we don't allow anyone to lay on it. And I said, for a photo shoot. And they went, all right then. So I actually laid on Freud's couch, which was great. I thought he was going to bill me for it in the morning.
Well, if it's not one thing, it's your mother.
That's right. Yes. So I think from a Freudian perspective, which is that we repress things that makes us feel anxious, and then jokes allow that to bubble up, which is why so many jokes about things that make us feel anxious, like death and health and so on. He would, of course, see, exactly as Paul said, a banana, quite phallic, sausages, quite phallic. So there might be some of that going on. It could be cultural, because clowns mess around with bananas and banana skins as in sort of slapstick comedy. And so you might be thinking, okay, that's something I just sort of see as a kid. The word is quite funny, I think. And it's yellow traditionally associated with happiness. There's not many yellow fruit, as few, but not many. So it's probably all those things. I'm not certain I've got a more insightful answer than the ones which Paul came out with himself. That's what I'm saying. No.
Well, it's interesting for me that the smiley face is always yellow, isn't it? The classic smiley face. Well, the classic cartoon, The Simpsons, what color is Homer? He's yellow. So maybe there is something subliminal in the color as well.
That's what I was saying. Yellow is traditionally a happy color. I mean, the other thing is a banana looks like a smiley face. So if you see someone who's sad, you can stick it in their mouth and push it into a smiley face. That's
the answer that we're going to send.
An answer.
And a Blue Peter badge as well to Mr. Zenon. Richard, we've reached the point in the show which we like to call Quickfire questions.
Quickfire questions.
You've worked in show business and obviously the magic circle. What I want, though, is the funniest business person that you've met.
Oh, my goodness. I'm going to give you a terrible answer. I'm certainly not going to name names, because in naming a name, you offend at least 100 other names. When I used to go around pitching TV shows, there was one particular producer who was extremely funny. I tell you who's very funny. Do you know Michael Vine?
Oh, by the way, Michael, I know Michael, yes, very well. The funniest
He's a funny
in
man.
show business. He is a funny man. But until you know Michael,
yes,
really well, you don't know quite how funny he is, because most people spend a lot of time trying to work out.
Yes,
for real.
Years ago, I was meeting up to have a meal with him, and so I went into this restaurant. They seated me by the window, and Michael hasn't turned up. And next thing I know, he's banging on the outside of the window, shouting, "Richard, they won't let me in. They won't let me in. Come and vouch for me." And so I went to vouch for him. And of course, they'd let him in. He just went in the back way. And so the reception, they're going, "What are you talking about?" I look over and Michael's now sitting at the table ordering.
Well, yes, I've been in a lot of bars with him, where he orders the Ipecaca or something like that. He loves business, as it's called in old show business thing, a bit of business.
Yes. So Michael did very, very funny. There was also somebody I won't mention I used to pitch TV shows with, who was extremely funny. And what he was so good at was using humor to plant ideas. So it was always the commissioning editor that had the idea, even though we'd walked in with it. They would plant it via a joke. And then the commissioning editor would go, "You know what you could do?" And they'd have the idea for us. And so this person always used to say, people have great ideas when I'm in the room. And if you try and convince anyone of something, it's difficult. When they have the idea, they think it's a genius idea. And so he used to use jokes to sort of just put in these little plants, these little primes.
That's very clever. That's very clever. You can tell me off camera who that is.
Okay.
Okay. What book makes you laugh?
Not many. You know, I'm surrounded by a couple of thousand books here about psychology and magic. I only read, this is terrible, I only read nonfiction. I don't think I've read a fiction book in my entire life. So nonfiction ones don't tend to be that funny. If I'm allowed to extend it to comics, Viz made me and makes me laugh a great deal.
The Viz Annual, there you go, it's a book.
There we go. And the Viz top tips still make me laugh. And a while ago, I came up with a top tip and sent it in and was then published in one of their books. And my little top tip was, convince your friends you've got a dog by going to the park and constantly shouting the word no. And for all of my many sort of achievements in life, that's the one. Getting a Viz top tip was the thing that made me happiest, I think.
Oh, well, it's brilliant as well. It's very, very funny.
Thank you.
What film makes you laugh?
A while ago, I wasn't very well, and I was sitting there on the couch feeling sorry for myself, and on came The In-Betweeners, which is this juvenile, puerile humour in film form. That's about the teenage kids, isn't it? In-Betweeners.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, no. My son was obsessed with them when he was a teenager.
I haven't laughed so much for a long, long time. It was not sophisticated stuff, it had to be said. And maybe it was the state I was in, but that used to make me laugh. In terms of TV, Curb Your Enthusiasm makes me laugh. Arrested Development makes me laugh. Count Arthur makes me laugh a lot. I watched 2 episodes of it last night, even though I'd seen them 100 times. So all of those things they're my go-to things when I want to laugh on television.
Okay, I'm going to switch it up a little bit here, and I'm going to ask, what's not funny?
I think everything has got the potential to be funny, and everything has got the potential not to be funny. I mean, you know, the number of times you've put somebody into a very funny situation and they've completely screwed it up. What's not funny? I think everything has got the potential to be funny. And what I love about life is it comes at you at moments you don't expect. A couple of years ago, I went for a meal with my brother. It was like in this, regular restaurant. We sit down, waiter comes over. My brother says, I'll have the mushroom risotto. The waiter says, I'll be interested to see what you make of that because we've had lots of complaints. It's one of my favorite things. And you think I wasn't expecting that, but it's what a joy that happened, and it made me laugh the rest of the evening. And it's one of those things, like now, whenever I go out with my brothers to order, I think of that moment, and it makes me laugh every single time. When we were kids, we used to go to, I think it was Bournemouth and Yarmouth, and all the cafes used to have check tablecloths, sort of like a grid on them. And when we sat down, my dad would always move the salt shaker from one square to another and say, check. Did it every time. Not, a little funny thing. Whenever I go to a cafe and it's got that type of tablecloth, I move the salt shaker and say, check.
In psychological terms, which is really interesting, is that's an anchor, isn't it?
Yes.
It is. And I love those kind of things. Whenever I get the bill in a restaurant, I do the American bit of business, which is, who broke the window?
Right.
The waiter's left his phone number. And my family have grown up with this, and grown is the word that is doing the heavy lifting there.
But it gets you through life. And I mean, I don't know, it's Andy Nyman, you probably know, a friend of mine and very funny man. He was the first person I saw to do this. I don't know if it's Andy's or not. Setting your phone to vibrate, and then when it rings, you pick it up and treat it like a shaver. You've not seen it?
No.
He showed it to me 20 years ago. I've been doing it for that long on every time. And just sort of pretending to shave. It's not hilarious, but it gets you through the day. It makes people smile. And I think that's what's lovely about it.
Oh, God, I love that. That's a bit of business, isn't it?
It's so great. It's so great. The first date I went on when I was about 18 years old, I was a check tablecloth. And so I sat down with this woman I was trying to impress. I thought, this is the moment. I moved the salt cellar and I said, checkmate. No laugh at all. I went back to my dad. I said, you've been doing it for years. He said, you said checkmate. It's too aggressive. It's check, not checkmate.
Of course. And by the way, it goes back to Neil Simon. K's are funny.
Right. Yes.
Which is, and wow, you really, my first question about, did you get brought up in a house where humor
no.
Intrinsic, it really was, wasn't it?
Oh, no, it really was. It really was. We had a long discussion whether check was funnier than checkmate. And he said, on a date, it's too aggressive to go checkmate. Like, that sounds like it's got some symbolism attached to it or something. So, but that to me is the nicest use of humor, those little things that just remind you of other people.
Oh, I love that. What word makes you laugh, Richard?
Banana's quite funny. Most of the words that make me laugh are quite rude, so I won't say them here.
You can. It's a podcast. We can do.
No. What word makes me laugh? I find Cardiff quite funny.
Okay.
Isn't that odd? I've never been there, but I find Cardiff quite funny. And whenever I need a comedy town, I normally go to Cardiff. I don't know what.
Well, it's again, we're going back to Neil Simon. It's the hard K, isn't it? But not at the end. At the start.
Not the end. Not the end.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. So I've just done a week in Cardiff. I don't know. I find Cardiff quite funny.
Well, it's the rhythm of you obviously probably know Jeremy Hicks as well, who's friends with Michael Vine. Jeremy Hicks is Ainsley Harriet's manager and everything, and him and Michael grew up together in Blackpool in that time. Okay. And I've actually completely lost the thread of where I was going.
Cardiff is where we came in at, if that helps.
Cardiff, oh yeah, no. And we would have an argument over case comes up next Thursday or Tuesday, and he will go on and on about it's Tuesday. I think he's actually right now, but I used to do it as Thursday and it worked for me.
That's really interesting. Case come up next and Thursday to me. No, I think I go with Tuesday. Case comes up next Tuesday.
Me too. Now I think he was right. And by the way, you should sit down with him because he's got some wonderful stories about, he spent 6 months working with Tommy Cooper, as a kid backstage, and he taught Tommy Cooper how to play chess. It's a very, very funny stories.
My favorite joke in a Tommy Cooper book, I'm sure Cooper never did it, and it's more of a magician's joke, but he had a little red handkerchief. He said, you can use this handkerchief to vanish an elephant. But the only problem is you can't examine it afterwards.
Wow, dark.
Yeah, I don't think Cooper ever used it, but it's in a Tommy Cooper book, and it's one of my favorite little bits. And if you know magic, it's kind of a nice little in joke. So anyway,
it's
I've turned this into the not quick fire round, unfortunately.
No, it's fine. It's fine. We love it. We're nearly there anyway. What sound makes you laugh, Richard?
I do find wind quite funny.
Penultimate question. You, as I said in my introduction, you are held the title of the only professor of the public understanding of psychology in the UK. Would you rather be considered clever or funny? Yeah,
it's a very good question, actually, because people have those two compartments and there's not a third one, which is clever and funny. So when I give lectures to students, I don't use humour because I really, really don't. And the reason for that is that I don't want to be that sort of funny professor. I could do it when I was younger. In my 20s, not when I wasn't much older than them, I could do it. But now, if something funny arises, I'll do it. But I wouldn't put it in because I think what they're doing is sort of putting you in the category of you're the funny professor, you're not the clever professor. And I don't want to be in the funny professor. But it's definitely an age thing.
In order to be funny, don't you have to automatically be clever?
In your mind, in my mind, not in their mind. I think if they walk out and go, that person made us laugh, they think that's not the same as that person made us think, or that person knows things. And I think in public talks, I'm very happy to be funny. And I think that then when you punctuate it with quite a profound thought, actually it has even more impact. But not when you're teaching students. Not in the last 25 years anyway. When I was younger, it was a little bit different, but definitely now, not so much. In terms of those two boxes, definitely funny. I definitely don't want people. I mean, somebody thinks you're intelligent, which I'm not particularly, but if somebody thinks you are, it's like a barrier, isn't it?
Everybody used to say, "Oh, he's a right clever clogs,"
Yes.
And that was a term of, it wasn't in term of endearment, was it?
No, it wasn't. And what's it mean? I mean, you just know a lot of stuff. Well done. So I think, I mean, the one I'd prefer would be sort of likable, but if out those two boxes, I suppose I would go with funny.
Well, I think we can definitely tick all those boxes with you.
Very kind.
Finally, Richard, desert island gags. You can only take one joke with you to a desert island. What is it?
It's not a very good joke, but the joke is, and so the reason I'm taking it is not because of the joke so much. So the joke is there's an elephant and a mouse, and the elephant looks at the mouse and says, "Why am I so big and strong and you're so weak and puny?" And the mouse looks up and says, "Well, I've been ill, haven't I?" Okay, that's the joke. The reason I would go with the joke is it was the first clean joke into Laugh Lab. When we did that year-long search, so we bring ourselves full circle in, I think, 1999, all the jokes that came in from the public were very, very rude, and you couldn't possibly use them. You know what jokes are like.
Yeah.
Then this one came in, and it was so innocent, and it was so lovely, and it made us laugh, I think, in the team, because we thought, at least we've got one joke. There's hope now that we're going to get other jokes that we can share with the public. And because of that moment of us laughing together, it reminds me of the team. It reminds me of that lovely day when we thought, my goodness, we're going to search the world's funniest joke. We've got no idea what we're doing. And then it became this big sort of international story. And it reminds me of those dear friends that I worked with to make that thing happen. So that's why I like the joke, not so much because the joke, because it's just about the loveliness of the situation.
Well, I now love the joke because it's been told to me by a fabulous guest. Professor Richard Wiseman, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on the Humourology Podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. An absolute pleasure.
The Humourology Podcast was hosted by Paul Boross, produced by David Rose. Music by Steve Hayworth, creative direction by Les Hughes, and additional research by Helen Sykes. Please remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This has been a Big Sky production.